Welcome to the Lost Signals Discusses Film and TV. Using the revolutionary Manzur-Amosi Thurlow scale,
or MOTS,
we scrupulously review these art forms with an emphasis on narrative structure. Join us for another entertaining episode.
Hello and welcome back to the Lost Signals Reviews Film and Television. Today we are doing another potential Oscar pick, a movie that I thoroughly enjoyed, Judas and the Black Messiah.
Judas.
Yes, Judas and the Black Messiah. I know. I'm your Jive host, Jonathan Ian Manzer, here with Christopher Morgan.
We're just a box of crackers running a podcast.
Yep. Stephen Ormosi.
As always.
Hey.
And Scott Dola.
Dig in.
Judas and the Black Messiah. I'm getting my biblical figures mixed up. I will give the funny log line. Congratulations, Bill O'Neill. You done played yourself. And I'm going to go into the plot of this. And before I do, though, I want to say that you can't not compare this to another film that came out this year, Trial of Chicago 7. Where I feel Trial of Chicago 7 was catnip for boomers to say, don't worry, you were revolutionaries. This is catnip for me. I'm not going to be biased in this review, or I'm going to be biased in this review because I'm a Marxist. And Fred Hampton's ideology is near exactly what
Straight up your alley. Sure.
So this was them saying, you're correct. And it's going to color my perspective of reviewing.
That's fair. Yeah.
But I can't help. But anyway, to go on to the plot of this, it's actually juggling a number of different stories. Right?
Yeah.
The primary one is dealing with Fred Hampton and Bill O'Neill. Fred Hampton is an up-and-coming member and deputy chairman of Black Panther Party in Chicago, and he's a charismatic leader with kind of that gospel tradition that I really admire in real life parallels with Cornel West and Nina Turner. And he is invigorating the community and attempting to create a unification of the different factions around Chicago, Latinos, different Black factions, even the poor whites, saying, hey, we're all up against the man. And then the man decides to say, yeah, we're going to stomp you out. So then Bill O'Neill is a petty car thief, gets caught impersonating an FBI agent. They're like, either go to jail or you become an infiltrator in the Black Panthers. And we're following his story as he's dealing with being drawn into the ideology, the rewards of staying with the federal government.
Sort of torn between both worlds.
Yeah, and then him becoming more and more entrapped with the environment. But you're also dealing with things which as Roy Mitchell, who seems like he starts off as a guy who actually does believe that Black Panthers pose a threat. He's an FBI agent. And then and you're seeing him being torn between the federal government and its heavy-handed tactics and him trying to do what's right. And overall, I think this juggles quite a lot of storylines and attempting to tell a lot of tales. Is it the perfect telling? Could it have been better if it was more focused? Perhaps. I think I like this movie quite a bit. If I have a critique, it's that they're trying to give a two-dimensional, if not three-dimensional, look at every single character in this. And it might fall short at points. So I'm giving it a very strong 2 initially, but not quite a 3.
Yeah, so I'm going to steal something from you yourself, E, that we run up to this often enough when dealing with a biopic like this, right? And as we've said a number of times, excuse me, that it sort of has to be a little bit, if not condensed per se, just somewhat shuffled. You know, to have the narrative within the the acceptable in quotes running time for a movie while trying its damnedest, and I think achieving it for them, give you a full-on picture of these people and the situation, etc. Right? So like I'm sort of in the same boat. Like again, and I know I keep doing this, but I can't help it. Score-wise, I want to say it's a 2.75. Right? It's super fucking strong. There was like maybe a few very very minor things I could like point out and be like, right? You said could it have been better? I mean, maybe, but I can't necessarily tell you how I would have changed it, right? So that's where I'm looking at. So what do you think about that?
You don't. There's an old saying: you don't sacrifice a good story for the truth. And I think they were erring on the side of giving a full story for everyone
Sure.
at the expense of a narrative structure. So
You know
you're
what? Yeah, that's well said. That might be it, but that's what I'm thinking.
like that was my impression throughout, is that they're like, granted, I appreciate the full nature that they had to go for, but did it cause kind of bumps in the road of the narrative? Yes, it did. And that's all. So I'll leave it off to the rest
I
of you.
feel, yeah. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I see exactly what you're saying, Ian. I don't know if that bothered me in terms of my experience of the film at all. I think I'm probably going to end up giving it a 3. You gave a pretty accurate and good description of what was going on throughout with your summary, your plot summary. So there's not a ton more. I enjoyed the way that this story kind of evolved from the beginning to the end. I thought really gave all the characters their due and really fleshed out a lot that was going on with them. In terms of how the plot uh, fell in line. So I don't have too much more to say. I think that we basically agree on what we thought about the movie. I'm just maybe going to give a little bit more credit than you guys, if that's if that makes sense. And yeah, that's it.
I chose to go last because what I'm going to say is going to segue nicely into themes. I'm giving it a 3 because here's why. Why, Ian, you're right about certain characters that are trying to give everybody, you all said it, they're trying to give everybody their due. But what I got out of it was more of a world building, because you had in a supporting role, spoilers, J. Edgar Hoover over here, played by a very left actor, well, maybe not by today's standards, but
Martin Sheen, by the way.
Martin Sheen, and then you had oh fuck,
Who was oh fuck?
oh my god,
My
Daniel
favorite actor.
Kaluuya's character. Oh my
Fred
god,
Hampton.
sorry,
Fred?
Fred Hampton.
Fred Hampton. Yeah, you have him on this side, so you have the voice of the radical the whole time. And every now and again, you'd hear from the establishment, be kind of like circling where it was kind of like a running commentary. And then the secondary to that was Jesse Plemons. I'm blocking his character's name, Mitchell?
Roy something. Roy Mitchell, yeah.
Roy Mitchell.
Special Agent Mitchell.
Yeah. And he kind of translated it to Lakeith Stanfield. And I'm doing great with these names today. And so you had this.
Bill O'Neill.
It was really interesting because you kind of had greater filter in Lakeith Stanfield against the greater order of Fred Hampton. But over here, you had the establishment. You had J. Edgar Hoover, and then you had Jesse Plemons kind of being his filter. So you had these two people meet in the middle. And while I agree with you, it kind of suffered a little bit narratively. I thought the world, and we're going to get into the themes. I think that the themes were strong enough and the execution to support those themes was good enough that I can feel safe to give this a 3. And even though I'm going to give themes a 1.
Yeah,
So,
I think. Buddy.
I just have one last thing today, is that comparing, I mentioned earlier that you have to compare it by just because it was released this year, to Child Chicago 7. Aaron Sorkin, for better or worse, is a master film. And he developed the narrative of Trial of Chicago 7 with the intention of cutting out a lot of the truth there, or at least highlighting the parts of the truth that he was interested in. This, probably for its benefit, was a much rougher production, which gave it an earnestness that was necessary. And that's kind of hard to say. Should I reward a rougher narrative because it informs an honesty, or
Ernest.
yeah? And I don't know if I can, because if I'm saying I don't know, I don't know if I can give it a 3 because I loved it so much, and perhaps I'm punishing it for how good I think it. I'm nitpicking the flaws that I see because I enjoyed it so much.
Right. But I mean, and I totally see your point. But what pushed me over the edge, because I was kind of where Scott was at 2.75, was the fact that you would have, these two voices of the literal voices of the establishment and the anti-establishment. But then through the strata, you got to see the echo effect of what happened in real life with the law enforcement, with what happened to Plemons' character, with what happened to Stanfield's character, where they came from. So there was a lot of moving parts, but I think it was words into action, but the actions didn't always have to be drastic, even though sometimes, and a lot of times they were. I don't know. I got a sense of narrative through the world, more so. Like, I kind of figured these characters, yeah, they were protagonists, or to get us into the world. But I think it's more of a shared universe. Yes, there's going to be protagonists and there's going to be secondary, but I think the whole point was to create as big a picture as possible.
I think that's why I'm going to end up giving it a 3, and maybe I'll take the burden. If you end up giving it a 2E, I totally understand. But since I said 2.75, and if I'm going to go with rounding up, which I've done before, that rounds to a 3. And I think yeah, even though it, like you said, it might be a quote unquote rougher narrative versus something like Trial, which I haven't even seen Trial. I've only listened to our review of it and other impressions. Yeah, I mean, I will obviously see it by the time Oscars happens, because it's up there now, at least at this time. But regardless, yeah, because they share a time frame and even characters, really, I think I'm going to give it the extra credit there, the extra bump, if you will, because sure, it may not be the most slickly produced narrative biopic thing versus a Sorkin film, especially of that, but to me, I still liked it enough that anything, like you said, that was iffy was just a road bump through it. So that's how I'm looking at it. So put me down for a 3 at the end of the day.
All right. So that's 3 3s and a 2, even though I really do want to give this a 3.
Sure.
Chris, I'm with you with themes.
Did it for you.
Themes is where, and I don't think there's any, as with Ian with the plot, I don't think having me be themes is an accent, because I too agree with pretty much everything that came out of Fred Hampton's mouth. We have, as Ian and I've often talked about, certain shows like Rising, and people like Nina Turner and Cornel West, yeah, this what we're seeing now is a new extension of everything he said. And the thing that everything I've learned in the last 2 years is that everything comes down to economics. Once you take the economics into it, and you see what the Democrats did with their voter suppression, if it's Bernie or Warren, versus what the Republicans do, depending upon their identity politics. At the end of the day, both sides, once you take the identity politics out of it, are the exact same way. The left, the Democrats, have a more diverse elite group, whereas the Republicans might have less of a diverse elite group, but they're still part of the same elite group. I mean, look how many Republicans were brave enough to back Joe Biden. All these guys that were rejected when people voted for Clinton and Trump, Clinton first term, Obama first term, and Trump. These are the, or that would have voted for Reagan. And you really got a chance to see that in this film. You really got a chance to see what it's like when you have a person of great influence and of great wisdom and does great, delivery. And he goes into the hall with all the white people with the Confederate flag, and he walks in not with anger, but with like, we're on the same side. And it was actually what kind of woke me up to it was I was listening to Janelle Monáe's last album, and I Am American. The man at the end who's orating it, he says about poor whites having their justice due. And it's true, as somebody who's knows and has known some lawyers in his life. And it is true. Economically, the justice is disproportionate by people by color. But at the end of the day, if you're a poor, it doesn't matter who you are. If you can only afford local counsel, and local counsel doesn't really care. So he took that approach, and it wasn't just a matter of like he was speaking to it. He was saying, "Go, don't take my word for it. Go check for yourself." And he was able to bring together the Rainbow Coalition on an economic message. Because if you look nowadays, everybody across the country, healthcare, livable income, infrastructure, which means the schools and the hospital. I mean, that's something that speaks to everybody or most people. And he was saying it so far ahead of his time. He was saying all those things, and I'm not biased by this. And I've been going into a very long explanation, but the thing is, the point is, everything he said is still reverberates for better or worse in some cases today. And I'm proud to be one of the people who feels the way he does and supports the people who are able to better get the message out to people. I'm proud of that, and I was really proud of this movie. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way. It just got me fired up again. It got me realizing, like, yes, so I'm giving it a very strong one.
I just said, you said he was ahead of his time. He wasn't. We're behind his time. All of this should have been handled centuries ago, decades ago, let alone yesterday. And again, everything you said, perfect. Like, that's how I absolutely feel I want to have. Because when it comes down to it, we're all human. We all have the same desires. We want to have security. We want to have not killed by the police, not suffering. And suffering is an interesting thing because it's a very personal thing. You never know how another person suffers, and everyone feels that their suffering is the most important thing because it's the most personal thing. And empathy is part of that is realizing that, yeah, you might have suffered more, but I recognize someone else's suffering. I might have suffered lightly, but I feel like that's my experience of suffering. They might have suffered. How do we all come together to alleviate as much as we can of that? And I think that this movie spoke to that quite a bit, and I hope I hope we come to these solutions in the future. So I'm giving it the strongest of all ones.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are right. Or at least I agree with it. Like a strong one for themes, because like it's not. And I kind of like wanted to say earlier that it's almost not revisionist. I'm not sure how to describe this. Like, right. So Fred was part of the Black Panthers. He was head of the chapter there, and like history, perhaps for maybe obvious or known reasons, like paints them as like radical revolutionaries. Oh, they call each other comrade. They were socialists. Like, yeah, they just wanted their families and other families in the community, like you said, to be safe, secure, and not being worried about being murdered by the police and the institution and the system, right? So, I mean, while that message may be obvious, I think you're right, like, or at least again, I agree. Unfortunately, it's still relevant to 40 years later almost at this point. And I think the movie handles it well, specifically in this case, kind of, or like, this is true of other things, like a lot of like sort of Black community centric films that are coming out this year, which I think we're all in support of and should be like, good that there's a spotlight on it and that they're getting out there, that like, yeah, man, these issues are still here. And the platform is essentially, like you said, like classism, right? Like wealth inequality, not necessarily by, ethnic groups or whatever else. And yeah, like you said, Chris, the fact that Fred united like basically other downtrodden / oppressed in some way, shape, or form members of the community that weren't necessarily like part of his ones, again, quote. But it doesn't matter because that's what his message was at the end of the day, right? We're all, like you said, suffering to some degree. So let's all come together and help ourselves and the community around us. And that's something certainly that if you can't really behind that, then you're probably one of the fat cats who doesn't give a shit about people anyways. So
I'm sorry, I just had an idea. I want to jump in here for a second because I think what this movie did great, as opposed to other films and similar thing, is that it showed how the status quo uses aspiration as a method of preserving its conservative preservation. They sold like you can become one of us is how they sold Bill on uh, on joining on betraying his fellows, and how they kept Roy from moving more towards being sympathetic. It was the fear of losing what you had, and I think the Fred's great strength is that he talked about aspiration for everyone. That it was not a zero sum game. We could all rise up together. All our struggles are valid. Versus that kind of you can leave behind and come and join the group to get that safety. And I think that's one of the. So sorry, Steve. I know you were supposed to speak, but that thought crossed my mind.
And real quick, yeah, that's a subtle point, but well said. And like, you're right. We probably should have mentioned like Bill's struggle, just because he had his own internal stuff, which maybe we'll get to in a question or two. But that's certainly there as well, and the film handled that quite well, I thought. So I'll shut up now and go ahead, Steve-O.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna bring up basically what you just said, Ian. That it is about that, like trying to find, trying to come up in the world, and like you see that in Bill's story a lot. But Fred talks about that to everybody that he talks to as well. Bill, really doesn't care about the collective nearly as much, which is why he's easier to pick off and turn against Fred over there, because he isn't all that interested in the movement, at least at the beginning. It's or I don't know how true that is to the real life Bill O'Neill, but it is a good storytelling device to show like why, to easily and quickly show why he could be turned. Also, they had a lot of leverage on him, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what you guys said, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. It's a very strong one, and yeah, Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield both do a great job of like kind of embodying the themes of this as their characters. So one's all around on themes.
Amen.
Well, continue talking about the antagonist.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I guess like the personification of the antagonist is maybe Roy, or even
I think it's his superiors too.
Hoover.
Hoover, yeah.
But like Roy is the most immediate version of that, and he's the one who antagonizes Bill O'Neill. Bill O'Neill is really the one that's putting the screws to Fred Hampton, even though he doesn't realize it, and so he's kind of a direct antagonist as well, I think. So I think this is a really complex answer on this movie, and I like that. I mean, you could also just say that
the man,
yeah, classism, or the the boot heel of the government are their own type of antagonists, which they are. But I think that you have two or three like really good examples of concrete antagonists in this, who all do very good at stirring up shit for their protagonists, whoever they may be.
seriously.
So I'm gonna give antagonist a strong one, and leave it off to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I second that. I agree. Like, perhaps this is endemic of like any film like this, like that takes place in and around this era, focusing on these things, on the thematics we just said, is that then is going to tie into the antagonism like force. I would think like they seem inextricably linked, and since if it handles the overall broad story well and characters and then thematics, then it flows thus into an antagonist. I'm sorry, to me, that you also have to give it a 1 because it is there. You're right, Steve-O. It's a personal struggle by Fred and Bill, and like sort of like somewhat the tension between them, especially I think internally for Bill, which we'll get to in a sense. But also Fred has his own like personal struggles too, while trying to be this community, this figurehead essentially for a movement, and trying to keep the peace within it, and trying to convince people of his message of let's unite, together and make things better in our community and perhaps then in the country itself, eventually as the end goal. So yeah, I think that they all feel the various pressures from both within and without, and at various moments and in various ways throughout the film. And I think there's a good job of portraying that. So I'm going to give it a very strong 1.
I agree with everything you said. That's why I'm going to say the system is the antagonist.
It always will be.
I know that sounds like broad, but you guys pointed out why that is, that there were all these little moving pieces. And as I said before, this being strata, this was a lot of tell and show. And, so yeah, I agree with everything you guys said. Plus, I'm just going to blame the system.
This is a gospel according to Judas, not the gospel according to Judas, because that's a little bit wild. But it is really making Judas the focal point here of the story. In fact, I'm pretty sure, because I crossed my mind that when he has that thing at the end and he dumps it on the table, like, oh, I think it's going to drop out 30 pieces of silver if they wanted to be hammer
on the nose
of that. But it turns out 30 pieces of silver here is a gas station. And that's like having that as a focal point, and there is that we didn't talk about this thing, but there is this biblical tradition throughout this of pairing it up with Judas and a Jesus-like figure in Fred Hampton, and having it from his point of view. That it's not just the symptom; it's a system. It's the greed that drives men, and why someone would sell out a great man like this. And it's that inner conflict in Bill of desiring and not having full faith in the message, desiring that utopia but not having full faith you can get to that utopia, so growing cynical about that and how can you profit off it. And it's fantastic, and I agree with everything you said. Yeah, the system's there, yeah, but if you look at it as that kind of biblical story, it's phenomenal.
I like that angle as well. Yeah, definitely works.
I love that angle.
All right, Scott, protagonist.
Yeah, so I think it's a pretty clear like 50-50 more or less. Like, and I like to think the way I come up with it is that it's sideways between Daniel Kaluuya's Fred and Lakeith's Bill, right? So it's sideways. It sort of focuses on sort of Bill at first, and then coincides with Fred's story, like his early upcoming what he's doing, but a through line, of course, goes throughout the entire sine wave. And I think, yeah, I mean, these are two great actors at the top of their game. I think like just fucking bringing it and killing it. And yeah, perhaps they benefit a little bit for the fact that this is a more or less biopic, so they have a lot of like, of course, real life stuff to work with. But even regardless, man, I think their stories are just fascinating, and especially like we said, just reflecting quickly back that struggle, who's like tempted by like trying to just basically make sure he's okay, but sort of like not even like buying into, like being convinced generally of by Fred's message as it goes on, and becoming like pretty close friends, or at least comrades, if you will, together in the movement. So I think that again it balances between the two characters really, really nicely, and the pacing is quite well. If I didn't mention that in plot, I'll mention it here. Maybe that's another reason why I bumped it up to a 3. But the fact that it's able to balance these two characters who are like somewhat, at least initially, not diametrically opposed, but opposed to some degree, and then sort of like come together, then some both personal and greater ambitions and responsibilities. So yeah, and again, the portrayals are just top notch. Like a high enough one. So I'm going to do that.
I'm kind of hard pressed to say which, like in terms of these actors, I'm kind of hard pressed to say which performance I enjoyed better. I think they're both
Why do you have to pick one? They're both equally
amazing.
awesome.
I mean, something's always better, right? But they both do a terrific job in their respective roles, and I love the portrayal of Fred as this kind of uniter, even while he's like um, just advocating violence, like angry, but he's uniting all the people under this banner, and like the Rainbow Coalition. You want to read some interesting shit, just go like look up that and like how that was formed and all the other. I mean, they only showed 3 groups in this, but like there were like 20 groups that were in the original Rainbow Coalition before.
It's an artifact of being the film, Steve-O, but yeah, certainly. Yeah.
But like it's so fascinating to watch the portrayal of that, and then the like very tight emotional work that Lakeith Stanfield's doing here as Bill O'Neill, as like this, trying to keep himself in check. Like the one scene where the guy is talking about torturing somebody and starts laughing, and then like he's like fucking disturbed as shit, and then he realizes he's supposed to be laughing too, so he like kind of goes overboard.
Gotta keep it together.
But, like he does that. He has those moments where like he goes overboard, and like maybe if you were really looking at him, it would be like suspicious. But he keeps it in check enough where it's like, oh, we know he's overboard because we know who he is.
It's only because you have the
like,
audience. Yeah.
I don't think you would notice that if you were like really like, that's such an incredible, like not even something you really think about. It was an incredible acting performance, and like it's the movie's just full of those, between with Lakeith playing Bill O'Neill as that, and then Kalia playing Fred Hampton is this just like gregarious, like likable dude. Like he just plays that really well, and I get why people would follow him, that type of thing. So both of them amazing, strong one for protagonists.
I just want to say that the propaganda against the Black Panthers worked, because when I was little, my perception of them was that they were just violent gang members who, like I just had this really.
That's how the system painted them.
Yeah, I grew up during the '90s, and that was, and nothing ever changes. But overall, I think that Fred Hampton, if this was him alone, would have almost been Gary Stewed. Yeah, he has his inner conflicts between, am I going to sacrifice my family or he has those conflicts, but in general, he is pure ideology in that sense of living exactly. But because of the performance, I don't have the character's name, the actor's name in front of me, but that is Bill O'Neill, in playing such a conflicted role that you're seeing the mythology and the real drama of human playing through Bill. I think it works and offsets in making both of them incredibly, and because of that betrayal, it makes it a tragedy. And we're witnessing, it's not a mythological figure going off, and it's a betrayal from within. And that heartbreak, I think, cements this as a fantastic work.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, one more thing to add before Chris, you can go, is that, again, Steve-O, I don't necessarily agree that you have to say like one is better, but I think they have amazing chemistry because in this movie, and they perform together in other things too, right? So like, I guess what I want to say is as actors and the way they portray his characters, that Lakeith has a sort of like dark, soulful eye, quiet in the corner, where you said Daniel is like gregarious and charismatic, and he's like this, he's always the center of attention. It's like making wonderful speeches, right? So I think those things juxtaposed together, plus the element of like Bill, like the Lakeith's Bill having to, knowing that, at least the audience irony is knowing that he's working sort of against him, but yet finds himself, convinced again, like going along with Fred's ideas, because is so convincing about them and is genuine about them. So I think it works again both ends, the way they sort of combine and bounce off each other. So that's my final thought. And Chris, you can speak now. You've been waiting to speak. So.
I don't have really too much to add besides the fact that it kind of made me at this one point. It kind of made me think of like something out of Godspell at the end. It's kind of like it's kind of like Jesus asks Judas to betray him, which wasn't the case, but it really dealt a lot with Judas's guilt. And from your point, I think we saw a really great transformation in Lakeith. I mean, like, you know, Bill O'Neill, his first character were introduced. So you got to see him alone in his world. And you got to see Fred Hampton alone in his world. But Bill O'Neill was the unifying. It started with him in the Eyes on the Prize 2, and it ended with the real Bill O'Neill. But what was great, what I mean, it wasn't great, this, because I agree with you, and this is just a tragedy, was that through line that, you know, you really, you know, he just, I mean, they both sold it, but like, you know, like Keith Stanfield, I mean, you know, just the regret, just like every step of the way. And then actually at the end, they told you really what happened to him. Yeah, I just, you know, I agree with him. I'm not choosing one's better than the other one, but ever since you brought up the biblical thing, and I was just like, shit, I just saw this through line with Bill O'Neill. So maybe for me, it's like a 55-45 or something like that. But yeah. So one.
So that's ones all around for days. Undisputed. One, I want to say that Dominique Fishback as Deborah did a phenomenal job. And you know what? She did quite a lot with what would normally be a character that would be introduced for historical reasons, but they don't do much with her. You can see how she is an important part of Fred's life, how it shaped his ideology, how it complemented his ideology. And I think that she brought a lot of empathy to this movie, and especially dealing with such elevated personalities as Bill and Fred were. And then I would say that actually one of my favorite scenes in this, I couldn't find the actress's name, but she plays the mother of with Jake, who Jake ends up getting killed, and there's emotional scene when Fred is speaking with her about, and I didn't cry, but I got a little bit. I was moved by that scene. I think it was one of their stronger moments in this film. So for those two performances, I'm going to give this a 1.
I just looked it up, by the way. If anybody was interested, it's Alicia Joy Powell is the actress who played.
Yes, right on. Give her credit for sure, because you're right. Like that was one of the most powerful scenes, like one of the I think highlight scenes among many. Like don't get me wrong, but I guess you saved Jesse Plemons for the rest of us.
I don't know if he's an antagonist or not. But
well, no, I was actually about to speak and say that the supporting characters, I mean, having Deborah in there really kind of added dimension to that world, but also she was a very strong character in her own right. And as you said, there's a lot of, you could see the effects of her presence. But on the other side, relating to systems, you also had Jesse Plemons being the avatar for the establishment. And even though his role was very slight, J. Edgar Hoover, Martin Sheen, you can kind of, like I said, this movie to me like connected a lot of dots, and so supporting is getting a 1.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm giving it a 1. Like you're right. Like Deborah is like, she in another like less handled, she would have been like relegated almost to the background, like included just because she had to be there for like historical purposes.
Deborah's here too.
yeah, right. Like, and then his fiance and wife was there as well. And then the story goes on, right? But no, like, and like, I'm gonna steal this because you said it. I don't know if you saw, but I saw a review that says she's basically the heart and soul of the film, or at least to Fred, and I think it's very much obvious, and she does a great job with it. Also, like Steve-O, maybe if you have the cast list, there was another woman member of the Black Panther who, like, early on when she takes the Keith for a drive, she's like sort of like suspicious of him, and she's like, hotwire the car, or whatever, and he does it. Like, and then she was in the shootout at the headquarters later on, right? So I thought she was like a pretty good character. Like, yeah, she's not the world, and also like sort of Fred's other close confidants, Jake, who gets killed, and Jimmy, I believe, was another friend who was in the hospital, right? So like, yeah, just like like you said, Chris, the world around them, it might have been a little smaller, but that makes sense anyways. And all the actors with their like minor-ish, or at least more minor characters, I still as well, on top of the ones we just mentioned. So I'm giving them a 1.
I think that character's name was Judy.
Yeah, that sounds
And
correct.
if it was, she was played by Dominique Thorne.
Yes. So give her credit, give Dominique Thorne credit as well. Everyone else you said, all the actual actors' names. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I think that I think all the actors did a good job. I like I said earlier, I might put Hoover and more so Roy into like the antagonist category, and if that's the case, probably the only reason, and not this isn't because they did a bad job acting it, but probably the only reason I'm giving supporting a 1 is Deborah.
Sure, like I get
because
that.
the other characters they don't do much, like there's 6 characters that I just named as protagonists and antagonists. There's not much room for a lot of growth in the other characters. Deborah actually does have a great arc though.
Good point.
Which is really strong. And I was trying to, and that scene with what the heck's his name is, Jake's mother, is also great. But like, it doesn't show any kind of character arc for her or anything. It just shows.
I think it does to a degree.
It gives, Fred a sounding board to, or it gives Fred like a little grounding in like what's going on.
I disagree slightly, and I don't want to go too much into it because time constraints. But the idea, like for instance, Jake he's a nice kid who gets wrapped up. You see how he gets radicalized, and the repercussions of radicalization, and the legacy of a good person who has one bad day being their defining is his character, who's a background character, has a arc and a thematic message outside of the major thematic thrust of this. And I think that, but like I don't
yeah, that's a really good point. I think
I agree with that.
Maybe I need to think about that more. But regardless, that is a very good point, and I think you're right about that. But that not even withstanding, it's still getting 1 for me. Specifically on the strength of Dominique Fishback's performance and the character as it was written. So it's a 1.
Chris, on to you with dialogue.
There was one line, I'm going to botch it, but it was just like, to the rich, it's democracy. To the poor, it's socialism. I don't know if that was a paraphrase or if that's actually something Fred Hampton said. But I don't think it really matters because a lot of the dialogue was based on certain things. So it resonated the message loud and clear. From a narrative standpoint, the dialogue was excellent. It was well delivered. One person I forgot to, some other people I forgot to mention were the associates of Roy's. And I always said that this movie is a lot of words into action into words, like it's kind of a game of telephone in a weird way. And I thought the dialogue handled that well because you'd hear J. Edgar Hoover say something and you'd come in and you could see the idealism in Roy diminishing the more he hung out with people and the more, so, as I said, there aren't many like lines because there's so much talking in this, but I thought that the dialogue had a very specific purpose in its generalness. So I'm giving it a very strong 1.
There's a line early in this movie when Deborah meets Fred for the first time, where she says, or she basically goes on this whole like rant about does he like poetry and all this stuff, and then she says, "You're a poet." That's kind of how I feel about the dialogue of this movie. Is it's very there's a rhythm to it, and it's really done super well, especially when Fred's talking. They really lean strong into the idea that he's a poet in his everyday life. And I also I love like when he like kind of guffaws about um, needing a script writer because he doesn't he doesn't need to practice his speeches or whatever, and then she catches him practicing other people's speeches like later on. Which is a great little moment. Like there's just all like, there's a ton of those in this movie, and they're all over the place, and they're all really well written. Like I love all the dialogue pieces that are going on here. And Chris, you said something earlier about how this is like tell end show, I guess, or something. I think you said something like that, and like I was thinking about it, and I was like, yeah, maybe I don't think this tells like too much, but think about it, and there is like a decent amount of exposition in this movie. It's just done really well, so it doesn't feel like exposition.
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah,
And I give it full marks for that, so I'm gonna give it a 1 for dialogue.
Yeah, I agree. I think dialogue is like, again, because it's possibly obviously tied into themes and stuff. And again, a lot of it's based on actual things that were said in real life from Fred and others, right? So they have that to draw from. But again, it's, filmified, if you will, like script written just enough. And even if the message itself is obvious and what they're saying, like it's never like, and I always give credit on any film or any story really that does this, where it's not just thrust in your face like over and over again for no reason. And if it is, it's at least changed up enough throughout that you still like understand it and makes sense. It's not, again, anviled on your head all the time, but it's something that should be and needs to be said perhaps repeatedly. And you're right, Steve, like the way they perform it, the way it is said by the actors as their characters, I think also elevates it to a high degree. So I'm giving it a very high 1 as well.
Just 2 comments. One, Scott came into this discussion precast asking if this was based on a stage play. What's what are stage plays known for? The dialogue in it.
Yep.
And you're asking, is this because this mimics so well the strength of a stage play? If it was, and I say that this could be easily adapted to be one if someone chose. Also, generally I'm pretty okay with giving one. This was cringeworthy at points, not because I was cringing, but awkwardness. I was actually upset about what I knew was coming. I was angry at Bill for betraying my ideals. And
Emotionality of it.
I had to pause at times out of just anger that I was feeling watching this. And that it affected me that way. That's based on the performances, it's based on the words spoken. So I have to give a very strong one.
Absolutely.
All right, Mr. Rossi, on to you with style.
Yeah, I really love the style of this. I think that there was a question that we used to talk about really early on about immersion, and whether or not there was any point where your immersion was broken. And this movie is one of the ones one of the first ones in a long time that made me think about that question. Like, I really got sucked into this movie full on. Like, there was no moments of like immersion breaking at all. And I have to credit that I don't know, like the camera work, I guess, or the the feeling of being there, or one of a million things that I think are done really well in this. But there's there's a lot to be said for like the cinematography of this movie. I didn't really I now that I think about it, maybe I should have more. Maybe I wasn't thinking about it at the time because I was so like sucked in. But I didn't really think about the music at all. If there
There wasn't much. Yes, thank you for mentioning that.
Which was interesting to me. Like afterwards, I was like, was there anything? Like I can't remember the score or anything. But Overall, I just love the aesthetic of this film, and I'm looking forward to seeing more by Shaka King, the director, by the way, who, um,
Credit.
I'm just excited to see more. So 1 for me.
Yeah, so like I don't know, like of course I liked it, and I might maybe channeling you just a little bit, E, because I believe we just recently did our listener request, The Beast, where you're like, I'm gonna give this one a 0 because it just wasn't quite up to snuff. Now I don't think that's the case here, but as you were talking, Steve-O, I did think to myself, in the opening like 5-10 minutes, they had like some nice, like, because it's Chicago in the late 60s, right? They had some jazz like sort of played over like the opening scene and shots in the credits, and then I think the music completely dropped off. There was no like, at least in my mind, I might be misremembering, but I don't remember a lot of it.
As sprinkled throughout.
I just don't remember that, E. Like,
Yeah.
I actually couldn't, like, I was like, I literally just saw this movie a couple hours ago, but I think maybe that's a smart choice. When it was there, then it's relegated to the background. It's not distracting you from the important things that are being said, discussions that are, being had. So either way, I'm giving it a 1. Yeah, Steve, I think the shots are really good. Like, I especially like the shots in the car, the interiors and stuff. I thought those were really good. Like, a la, if you're watching this, like Steve-O's background, like I mentioned the one where Judy, I believe her character's name was, sort of like confronts Lakeith Bill, and I was like, oh, if you're really a car thief, then you'll hotwire cars. I thought it was a really well shot scene as well, framed in the car and so forth. So yeah, all of that throughout, like, and even some of the action-y in quotes parts, like the shootout and like some other things, especially the speeches as well, when Fred's speaking to the other communities, and he's in the hall and he's in the church, right? All that stuff was great. So yeah, I'm giving it a pretty damn to solid 1. Maybe not as strong as like the standout of other things about it, but still a 1 at the end of the day. Absolutely.
I love the music. It's definitely the first thing I noticed, and the music kind of added, like, and I mean this in the best possible way, bleachers to the film. In other words, like, when, like, speaking personally, when you want to have something in the back, this happens classical music too. You want something to support the melody. You've got these harmonies, you've got counter melodies. Electronic music, we call them pads, they're in the background, but they're supporting everything else. And the music did a great job doing that most of the film. Or actually all the film, actually. I also want to give a shout out to her. She did a song at the ending credits. And otherwise, I think the style of this is like great. My immersion was broken constantly because it was making me think too much. It was making me, you're preaching to the choir, and you're feeling this call to action, this call to be sanctimonious, and you're like, no, sit down and watch the film. But I'm giving it a 1. I thought the film was great. And Scott, to resonate what you said, this could and Ian, what you said, this very well had the tone and temperament and could actually be adapted to a stage play. So it was getting a very strong 1.
I'm going to use my time in style to do an unpaid promotion. Fred Hampton Jr. is right now raising money to buy and restore Fred Hampton's house and turn it into a museum in Chicago. And I think it's a very worthwhile cause. So there's a GoFundMe for it. If we remember, I want to link it into the website and the YouTube thing.
We'll have some information for sure.
But you're watching this on streaming. This is worth. If you thought it was worth the price of admission into a theater, send that kind of cost and help him out, because I think that Fred Hampton's memory should be preserved. I'm glad this movie came out. I'm glad I got a chance to learn more about this, unfortunately to me, forgotten hero of the fight. Anyway, so 1. Scott, do you recommend Judas and the Black Messiah?
Yes, I do. Quite highly, in fact. Like, so yeah, like, there's been not a rash, like a number of films that are coming out again, focusing on these issues in this community, and I think that's rightly so an important thing to be happening right now, even if it's like because of unfortunate reasons. That's the fucking America we live in. But I definitely recommend this film. It was extremely well done. Again, all the portrayals, everything we just said. I think I'm giving it a 10. I don't know if I would give it a 10 off our scale, but it doesn't matter because it's a super strong, and I think important, relevant movie to watch, really well composed, and everything we just said is all the reasons why you should see it, and thus I am recommending it quite highly.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that it's a movie that should be watched, and it's a very it's rough. It can be rough at points, but it's also just an entertaining movie as well. Like it'll keep your interest. It'll keep you, watching, and it's a fascinating story that I'm glad they told and I'm glad they told in a way that is really well done and just a good flick to watch. So check it out.
Yeah, sorry. And one quick thought to add on both of you before you get to go, Chris, is that perhaps it will spur you to learn more and support Fred's son to create a sort of memorial for it and remember what happened and celebrate his life and who he was. So
Biasly, I recommend it because it's getting his message out, and but as as a film, it's excellent. It creates has a strata. It's a complete world. There's a lot of moving parts, and at times maybe character suffers a little. Just so you understand that it's not all passion with me, but it is very passionate. It is a very passionate piece, and I highly recommend it as a film, and to keep getting the message out.
definitely.
I adored it. I loved his message, and what I'm going to say is rest in power, comrade, and it's that. So that's 3 10s and a 9 for me because I am going to be the curmudgeon on this one, giving a 9.75, which I think is
Perfectly,
right.
yeah, right on, spot on.
This is probably one of my favorite of the current day re-exploration of Black culture in film that we're seeing, the re-emergence of that. I think this is one of my favorite films from that. But beyond that, it's probably one of my favorite films of the year.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Or I guess whatever comments as we go on. I'm Jonathan E. Manzer here with Christopher Morgan.
Hey, good night. And I also want to give a plug. Amber Ruffin from Seth Meyers did a piece on White History Month. I highly recommend everybody go and watch. So good night, live long and prosper, peace and long life.
Stephen Ramosi.
Have a good night.
And Scott Thurlow.
All power to all the people. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Editing and engineering by Christopher Morgan. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.
Or Mott's?